Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic day or night or whatever time it is for you. Coming back, I know it's been a long time. Well, not super long, but it's been a while. And the only reason for it being as much time as it was in between me making a video and releasing one was I had surgery, and it's nothing bad. It was something that was really successful and it worked out perfectly fine, and everything's good and well. But that's the reason why. It's just because, unfortunately, I was in, a little bit of pain, and certain types of pain for me will make it so that I just don't want to do anything. And I guess that is how it is for a lot of people. But we're going back to some true spooky, scary horror stories, the au naturel, what most people like. Try to do some of the creepypastas, and I will continue to do those. Don't get me wrong. I do enjoy them. I just don't think maybe the channel or, the audience, you guys, maybe we're not in quite a position where you guys like that sort of thing as much as you guys like originally what you came here for. So, we'll do the creepypastas every once in a while. We'll section them out and flip-flop every now and again, but I think we'll just for what's best for the channel right now, I think we'll just stick to what's best and what you guys like the most, and that's the true horror stories. So it's good to be back, and it's good to be doing something that is reliable and something that I know that you guys reliably enjoy listening to. And yeah, I'm gonna stop talking, but thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for the love and support. Don't forget to subscribe. You don't have to, but it's much appreciated, and I hope you enjoy today's stories as much as I did reading them. And I'll catch you guys a little later. Thank you so much for everything. My friends and I were driving back from a rave in Denver. We take 287 from Fort Collins to Laramie because it is the quickest way home. 287 is a beautiful drive during the day, but empty and sketchy at night, especially during winter. I was in the back seat and inebriated, so I missed this, but I asked my friend who was in the passenger seat to tell me the main story again. Owl Canyon is a little two-lane detour that I think might have been unpaved at the time. Car on the side of the road, just after the Owl Canyon's so rocky-ass cliffs. Pitch black either side of the road. Dude is just chilling in the middle of the road, and it's all black. He's just trying to wave us down. We don't see him till maybe 20 or 30 feet, and I have to swerve hard to miss him. Don't know why he wanted us to stop, but I don't think it was good. This would have been around 3 a.m. probably, and like I said, it would be pretty empty out there at that hour, so this was pretty weird. The helper in me is maybe he was in trouble, but I'm glad my friends have some street smarts, because if he had any bad intentions or some kind of weapon, we would have been fucked. We were all pretty young at that time as well. This isn't as exciting as some of the stories, but I wanted to give you some of my Wyoming flavor. This state is so big and empty, there's no way there's not some backstory creepy stuff that happens all the time here. I lived in southern Delaware, about 13 years in a pretty woodsy area. It was about 15 minutes to the nearest small town and 40 to the nearest small city. My house was surrounded by a nature preserve that allowed hunting by a special permit, and I used to play in those woods for hours as a kid. Part of the nature preserve, about a half a mile away, had a vehicle trail you could go to with your truck, ATV, or whatever type of vehicle you had, and had a few abandoned fields. Occasionally, I'd walk up there by myself just to enjoy nature. One of my favorite areas was an old farming field with a tiny pond surrounded by pine forest. This area is blocked off by large pieces of a concrete fence and is not accessible by vehicle. This is important. I recently revisited the area after not exploring it for about 3 or 4 years and brought my fiance with me. I took her to the area mentioned above, as I used to find cool rocks and sometimes animal bones to take home, since I'm into vulture culture and wanted to show her my favorite childhood quiet area. We started looking for bones and, hey, we found some remains of a doe, and more, and another. Altogether, there were the skeletons of around 5 deers, some bucks, some does. Now, while hunting is allowed in parts of the preserve, it is not in this area. Also, when you hunt, you are required to field dress, remove organs in the area of death, and take the rest of the carcass with you, as most hunters around there hunt for food. These were not full skeletons, just bits and pieces. We found 3 partial skulls, so it wasn't just trophy hunters taking down a buck or doe for a mount, and the remains were in about 6 foot of a radius. If it was hunters, they'd have to take the entire carcass with them by walking the mile back to the main trail, clean and butcher the deer elsewhere, then return and carry the butchered remains back to the area and dump it in one specific point, and also not dump the entire skeleton. We're a bit freaked out at this point, and then we realize that the forest is almost entirely quiet, except a few quail calls. And as a kid, I used to hear train whistles in this area. There are no trains in the area, except some cargo rails that ran 3 or 4 times a year about 15 miles away, and remembered the silence that came after those calls. We're thoroughly creeped out by all the weird bone area and the unusual silence, so we speed walked back to the vehicle trail, got in my car, and drove back to my family's house. We don't plan to go back. The Okefenokee Swamp is located mostly in South Georgia and partly in North Florida. I've been going there since I was a kid. My dad and uncle were avid outdoorsmen. They were always canoeing, hiking, hunting, fishing, etc. And I grew up learning to love the same things. Now, if the first thing that came to your mind when I said swamp was alligators, you would be correct. And the Okefenokee has some of the biggest around. It may sound super scary to non-Southerners, but the old saying really is true. If you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. Canoeing slowly across the dark tea-colored waters. If you pass too closely to one, it'll quietly sink into the murky depths. He's not coming to get you. You've simply interrupted his sunbathing. As elementary school kids in South Georgia, it was kind of a rite of passage to go on the Okefenokee field trip and be led on a guided tour by Okefenokee Joe. Joe was a true outdoorsman, extremely knowledgeable, friendly, good with the kids, and funny. A little strange, but generally regarded as a good guy. A local legend. He would get that bow closer to the big gators than my dad ever let me get. He taught us kids all about them. We even got to hear the mating call of some of the males and watch a lot of their behavior up close. He would also show us all the birds, snakes, and other wildlife. The swamp's residents were so used to Joe's bow that they didn't flee when he got close. Great memories. Anyhow, fast forward to my adulthood, and I still have a great love for the outdoors. I'd recently gotten married and was successfully getting my wife and stepdaughter into kayaking, camping, and hiking. I'd broken them in fairly easy. Calm lakes and beautiful crystal clear blue spring-fed Florida waterways. We'd encountered some gators, but the girls had already become comfortable with the fact that they don't want to hurt humans. I decided it was time to go out of the Okefenokee and show them my childhood swamp stomping grounds. We headed out one weekend, kind of on a whim. I hadn't called ahead to reserve a campsite because I assumed it wouldn't be that busy yet. Well, I was wrong. Every tent camping site was booked. I was pretty visibly bummed out, so I guess the ranger felt sorry for me. She told us to hold on. She was going to check one more thing. When she came back, she had great news. There was a primitive group site available. If you aren't familiar, these are larger area sites that are usually for big groups like Boy Scouts, usually situated away from the main campground areas. They do not have electricity. We camp 100% primitive all the time, so this wasn't an issue for us at all. The ranger explained that this particular group site had been closed for 2 seasons due to the road being washed out. She said they had just fixed the road the week before, but hadn't gone around to relisting the site as available. She offered to sell it to us for a normal fee instead of the group fee. Deal. We pay and she vaguely shows us on the map how to get to our home for the night. I remember thinking, damn, that's far as hell from all the other sites. It's gonna be nice and quiet. Perfect. While at the office, we learned that the evening there was going to be a ranger-guided night paddle. This particular park inside the Okefenokee is a designated dark sky park, meaning there's very little light pollution. I was already excited about showing my family the stars and Milky Way. So getting out onto the water at night and seeing the skies that way sounded sweet. We decided to sign up for the night paddle and then headed off to find our campsite. When we got there, you could tell right away that the area hadn't been used in several years. Overgrown, spider webs everywhere, teeming with the usual wildlife. I kind of prefer things this way, so I didn't think twice about it. It was so far from the campgrounds and the main office area, you couldn't hear a single sound of humans or vehicles. The area was large, so I walked around a bit to find a good spot to set up. I looked back at my map to try to gauge exactly how this little island was shaped, and noticed that what I was seeing and what the map showed didn't quite line up. Whatever. I'm sure I'm just reading it wrong. We set up our camp and just enjoyed the sunshine and the sounds of nature. It was still very early spring, so the hordes of mosquitoes and various other swamp bugs weren't out in full force yet. The bugs in the swamp and the summer moths could be a horror story of their own. Around 7:30 p.m., we loaded the kayaks back into the pickup and headed all the way across the park to the launch area, as our guided paddle was supposed to start at 8. We approached the launch area to unload, and there was a good 15 or 20 other people going on the paddle, led by a young enthusiastic ranger. We all slipped off into the water, with our headlamps on the red light setting. We exit the small canal we had been traveling in and emerged out into a larger river-type waterway that meandered through the swamp. As we slowly and quietly creeped along, cypress trees draped with Spanish moss looming over us on both sides, with a dramatic orange and pink sunset as their backdrop. The sun finally began disappearing and the stars started to come out. It was absolutely stunning, and still one of my favorite kayaking memories. I'd never actually seen the Milky Way like that before. It was a new moon night, dark as could be. About a mile from our original launch, we all congregated out in the middle of the wide waterway and sat completely still and quiet. The motionless, dark waters of the swamp reflected the skies like a mirror. Thousands of stars and galaxies twinkled above us and below us. It was like being in space. Shooting stars were visible every few minutes. It really was magical. The only artificial light in the sky was the dull glow of Jacksonville, Florida on the horizon, which was about 100 miles to our southeast. After a while, the ranger snapped all of us out of our trances. It was time to head back. When we were paddling out there, it had been dusk/twilight for most of the trip. Not much light, but enough to kind of silhouette the trees and branches against the sky, and a slight glimmer on the water. By now it was pitch black, and I do mean pitch black. The ranger told us to switch our headlamps back on to the normal white light setting so that we could all see well enough to navigate out of the swamp. As each headlamp slowly switched on and a swamp was illuminated, we were met with hundreds of glowing eyes. Hundreds. I swear to you, now, as I said it earlier, I grew up out here. Gators were nothing new or scary to me at all. However, growing up, we never really stayed out on the water past dark. We would shine our lights out over the water to look at all the eyes, but from dry land, far away from the beasts. Now, I found myself and my little family quite literally pushing past floating gators with our kayaks. They were absolutely everywhere, all over the sides of the channel, as well as blocking our way in the center. The ranger was leading and assured everyone not to worry. He paddled up towards a huge group of shining eyes ahead of us and pushed right through them. Most of the eyes just disappeared under the water, but the gator directly in the ranger's path thrashed, and his tail actually hit the kayak. Holy shit. Sharp gasps from the group pierced the otherwise quiet southern night air, but the ranger showed zero signs of panic, which was reassuring. We all just trusted the young man that we weren't going to royally piss off these things by kayaking straight into them. As we went along, the sounds of gators being bumped by kayaks and thrashing were heard every couple minutes. There weren't any other jarring sounds or movements, just the constant calling of frogs, cicadas, and the splashing of disturbed dinosaurs. When we finally turned back into the small channel that led to the launch, there were no more glowing eyes. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't been a bit freaked out, but I can honestly say I wasn't panicking. The ranger being so cool and confident while leading the way made it pretty easy to stay calm. Everyone started to relax again as we neared the launch, and we all got out, loaded up our boats, and one by one headed back to our camps. There was a line of red tail lights trailing off toward the main campground, while my wife, daughter, and myself split off, alone, into the darkness towards the other side of the park where the site was. I do remember that feeling kind of eerie. But everyone had made it through the gator gauntlet safely with no problems. Now we were laughing about it and remarking on how cool the whole experience was. We were in high spirits, no stress, but we had no idea of the terror that would come later in the night. We finally got back to our side around midnight, and we were starving. I got a nice fire going while my wife prepped dinner. The meal finished cooking around 1 a.m., and we finally all settled down to get comfy by the fire and eat. I hadn't taken 2 bites of my food when the horrifying experience began. The cicadas and frogs were singing, but you tend to drown that out into the background noise because it's so constant. Suddenly, out of the calming buzz of their singing, sprung a sound that I will never forget. A low, rumbling, guttural growl, long, deep, vibrating in our chests. We all froze and looked at each other like, did y'all just hear that shit? Not even 10 seconds later, we hear it again. Yes, we all definitely fucking heard that shit. It sounded close. Really close. Like right on the other side of the brush we were camped near. The only thing I could honestly relate it to at the time was the growling sound the T-Rex makes in Jurassic Park. I was terrified. I've been scared in the woods and swamps, I've seen swamp gas, freaky figures, heard screams. I've been in the Marine Corps. I've encountered bears in the Appalachian Mountains. I've explored and experienced all kinds of places. When I tell you I have never been this scared, I mean it. Pure, raw, primordial fear. I immediately told the girls to get into the cab of my pickup. They get into the truck, and I hop into the bed of the truck with my little .357 Magnum drawn. I figured being back there would get me up off of the ground and give me a little advantage over whatever was coming. I told the girls to lock the doors and open the little sliding back window so we could communicate. I start frantically shining my flashlight around, aiming my gun along with it. I absolutely see nothing. We continue to hear the growling coming from one general direction, not getting any softer or louder, just continuously emitting in 3 to 5 second long intervals, every 30 seconds or so. It was coming from the brush right next to our site. I shine my light all over that area, but I see nothing, just thick palmetto leaves, underbrush and pine, no movement whatsoever. Then, suddenly, we hear the sound coming from the complete opposite direction, more towards the open area of the site. I whip around and shine my light that way. That's when I noticed the dense fog that had settled into the entire area. It was a damp, sticky, suffocating fog. Almost right away, the growling sound was coming back from the original direction. I whip around, but immediately I hear it again behind me. That's when I realized there were two of them, doing a kind of call and answer with each other. It's also when I realized that the other sounds of the swamp had gone silent. Nothing but the call and answer of whatever was making these absolutely gut-wrenching sounds. It got deafeningly quiet for a moment, but nothing was a heavy fog which seemed to have a silent sound of its own. My wife, with a shaky, trembling voice, told me she wanted to leave immediately, that our daughter agreed. Now, I was absolutely terrified. Do not misunderstand this. However, the thought of just leaving all of my expensive camping gear behind was somehow more offensive. Not to mention, I was getting kind of frustrated. I am at home in this damp swamp. I know all of the creatures here. I'm comfortable here. It's borderline pissing me off that something out there was so scared and confused. I was trying to rationalize what could be making this sound. Suddenly, it started back up again, but now it sounds like there could be 4 or 5 of them, all growling back and forth to each other, overlapping each other now, coming from all sides, a demonic chorus of deep, rattling, soul-sucking rumbles, not getting any closer or farther away, just keeping us closely surrounded. If I'd had to shit, I believe I would have shat myself. I kept myself at least somewhat cool by affirming that it must be animals of some kind. I would have even entertained the thought of anything supernatural or cryptid. My wife kept saying it sounded like a big cat, and while I agreed, I knew that just wasn't it. It would have had to have been massive lions or tigers to make that kind of extremely low rumbling growl. Impossible. I wrecked my brain for the biggest animal it could possibly be, and I just kept landing on alligator. Yet, we had just paddled directly through an entire swarm of them, some of them absolutely massive, and they hadn't made a single sound the whole time we were out there on the water. No, that couldn't be it. I even had a thought that the young, playful ranger had somehow orchestrated some kind of extravagant practical joke on us poor campers out here all alone. Really and truly, I had no fucking idea what it was, and not being able to even see a glimpse so I could take a shot at it to protect my family was a very helpless feeling. I really wish I had more words on how I felt, just blindly standing in the back of the truck, hearing what I could only imagine were the scariest, evilest, most vile things on the planet, just knowing that they wanted to kill, eat, or otherwise mutilate myself and my family. It felt like an eternity, but we'd finally only been holed up in my truck for about 10 or 15 minutes by now. It had finally gone quiet again, and I told the girls that we could leave, but I'm not leaving the gear. I climbed into the cab and started the truck and moved it, positioning it to where I could shine the headlights onto our stuff while I packed up all the gear. Gun in hand, I began rolling up the tent, gathering all of our crap and throwing it into the bed of the truck, praying nothing crazy happened like my truck dying or some other perfectly timed cinematic horror moment. I tried to put on a confident air so as not to scare my family, but in my head I felt so fucking vulnerable, like I was something's prey. The growling still hadn't come back, but honestly, the silence was freaking me out more than anything. And the fog, I'll never forget how oppressive that fog felt. All of our gear was sopping wet with it, and I swear, it was hard to breathe the air. The fire was nothing but a smolder despite the fact that it had been roaring and bright 20 minutes ago. Just as I was rolling up the very last sleeping mat, one final, closer than before growl shook me to my core. I snatched the mat up and took off running, getting into the truck Dukes of Hazzard style and taking the fuck off. None of us looked back. Thank you everyone for listening. If your story was told, I'm glad I'm the one who could tell it. I appreciate all the love and support, and please don't forget to subscribe. I hope you enjoyed today's stories as much as I did reading them.